had escaped the hell of ill-fitting gray and gold gym shorts, running laps in sweaty locker rooms until my junior year of high school. Sitting in my guidance counselor's office, I heard the ugliest words in the English language. "Amy, you're going to have to take a PE class." I was a fat girl, am a fat girl, who wouldn't consider running out of a burning building, much less for fun. I was uncoordinated, uninterested, and very lazy. I also had a long and impressive history of getting out of PE class, like that time in middle school when I got busted for forging a doctor's note for my serious, life-threatening asthma. Now, the ugly reality of running bleachers was imminent. I searched desperately for a loophole and found that I could take a vocational class instead of gym and still graduate. Thank God. Welding, auto mechanic, and ag classes were out. Sounded like work. But basic food preparation, doable. Cooking for an hour a day instead of running, oh hell yeah. I was decidedly wrong about basic food prep being easy. But I fell in love with the work of the kitchen so much that I didn't recognize that I was running around a hot kitchen, sweating like a horse for 2 hours every day. From the first time I stepped into that classroom kitchen, I was fascinated by turning raw ingredients into something that tasted really, really good, even if it was just frozen pizza dough and canned sauce. I signed up for culinary arts the next semester, and here I fell even harder for cooking. I learned fancy techniques, how to brunoise and chiffonade and turn butter and flour into flaky pie crust. At first, though, I was really, really bad at cooking. My pie crust sucked, and I once served a pile of scrambled eggs as a mango custard pie, but it didn't really matter. Cooking was a place where I could be creative, even if the results didn't turn out like I'd planned. As much as I loved it, cooking was never part of my career plan. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, but it was not standing in a hot kitchen for 16 hours a day. I headed off to Texas Tech to study communications, and after I left college, bored and aimless, I moved back home to watch a lot of Food Network and fight with my mother. I started watching Food Network, and I started cooking again. I learned so much in that time, and would mix pieces that I learned on TV with dishes from my childhood, and it was all mostly edible. I made pasta and pork tenderloin, and I never killed anyone. After a while, I decided to move out on my own to Dallas, and then I was too broke to cook anything more remarkable than a lean cuisine. When I did have extra cash, I went to Jimmy's food store in East Dallas. There was no better way for me to blow $50 than on imported meats and fancy cheeses and fresh pasta. On one trip, I noticed a ramshackle produce stand next door. I'd found Spice Man's 1410, manned by Tom Spicer. Tom was, to say the very least, an interesting man. He sold produce out of a crumbling old building in front of his garden, wrote strange poetry, and had been a musician in a previous life. The shop wasn't a store so much as it was a pile of boxes, a couple of coolers, and a deli case full of bizarre mushrooms that looked like they would get you arrested. A stack of orders read like a who's who of Dallas restaurants, and I was wide-eyed. Out back was the garden, where Tom patiently explained the weird greens and herbs that he grew there. I had no clue what he was talking about or what arugula was, but I knew that this was really important. Here I was, where chefs buy food to make these dishes that I can't even afford to think about, and I could get whatever I wanted. I bought an $8 bag of arugula, more than I'd ever spent on a vegetable in my life, and made my first pesto. And it was then that I decided to get really, really good at cooking. Tom's arugula was famous, and it was as remarkable as everyone said. My pesto kicked ass. I kept coming back, always discovering something. Morel mushrooms, Oregon truffles, whatever the hell pea tendrils are. As he bagged up my dime bags of mushrooms and taught me how to pick the ripest tomatoes, I received a free culinary education. Tom Spicer could have told me to eat fish butts, and I would have. I cooked his weird fiddlehead ferns and stuffed squash blossoms with goat cheese, and sometimes had to pretend that I liked them. I took him a jar of soup one day that I'd made from one of his huge squashes. He drank a little straight from the jar, said it was good. It probably was not very good. I went to the garden even when I was really broke. When I handed over that jar of soup, I had planned to just get a little arugula. Then he started talking. He loaded me down with a few bags of produce and refused my money. "We're bartering," he said. I really didn't have the money to be spending on fancy produce, and it felt like he knew that. I got in my car, cried a little bit, drove home, and made pizza. Over the next year, I cooked constantly. I also overestimated my ability constantly, which meant some pretty spectacular fuck-ups. I exploded a blackberry cobbler, remnants of which are probably still glued to the inside of that apartment oven. I have food poisoned and burned and cut myself more times than I can count. I forced food on all my brave and trusting friends as I worked to perfect my recipes. After flattering me for months, they were now fighting over the last helping of my signature $20 mac and cheese. The weird things that I brought home from Tom's garden turned simple dishes into fancy dinners. I became that obnoxious person who posts every meal on Facebook. Cooking was just a hobby for me, though, until I was laid off from my editing job in 2013. With no experience, I answered a call for food writers at the Dallas Observer. None of my writing samples had a damn thing to do with food, and I qualified my experience by saying, "I go to a lot of restaurants and bars." Weirdly enough, they liked me, and I turned in my first story a few days later. I actually knew very little about Dallas or restaurants, and I learned French and Spanish terms on the fly, spent money I didn't have at restaurants, and interviewed dozens of chefs. I cooked at home, trying to make the things that I'd seen in these great restaurants, which frequently meant fucking it up and depositing it directly into the trash. But I kept at it, and I kept going to the garden, though less and less as the years went on. Tom died suddenly earlier this year, and I felt that loss as if I were his close friend. There's no one that's had a bigger impact on my cooking than Tom. I also frequently remember his words when I'm writing, like how to tell when a chef is bullshitting me or when the vegetables are really in or out of season. I've had some incredible experiences in my relatively short time as a food writer. I've had my words in some of my dream publications and sipped bourbon straight from the barrel in Kentucky. I've spent more than my rent on dinners in New York City. I have met so many weird, wonderful, interesting, weird people. And I am always still cooking. Sometimes it's a recipe that I've swiped from a local chef. Others, it's the pull-apart pizza bread that I first made in my cooking class. I still screw up a lot of food. And like many of my recipes, pretty much nothing in my life has turned out like I planned. But now, I just get to go home and write a column about it.